The sterile, echoing hallway of the ICU. Boxes are flying through the air. Seojun is laughing, his tattoos catching the harsh fluorescent light. Seojun. Pick them up. Everything that falls to the floor is just like you, delivery girl, trash. You think that belly gives you a pass? In my world, even the unborn learn to bow to a king. Lisa, he laughed as the cardboard corners bit into my skin, unaware that the global empire he spent his life trying to impress already belonged to me. Paul the First believed the lady asked you a question, Seojun. And I suggest you find your tongue before I find a reason to cut it out. Nobody warned Lisa Vance that the greatest battle for her husband's legacy would happen on a humid Thursday in an ICU hallway. It happened in a polyester uniform she had ironed herself. It happened in a hospital where the very air was paid for by her late husband's sweat. She had been undercover at App & Company for exactly 6 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. She had counted every single one. Not because she was a glutton for misery, but because when you lose the only person who ever truly saw you, you learn that time is the only thing you can actually own. Hey, besties. Welcome to Clemency Love Stories. If this story is already hitting close to home, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments. Have you ever felt like you were living in someone else's shadow? Also, drop your time and location so we can say hi. Now, let's get back to the most expensive. She had lost Marcus to a freak accident on a clear Tuesday morning, just 3 days after the ultrasound showed a heartbeat. She had watched his board of directors, men Marcus had raised from nothing, treat his death like a corporate restructuring and her grief like an inconvenient line item. You learn to keep track when people view your existence as a debt. You learn to hold your breath until you have enough oxygen to blow the whole house down. But nobody warned her. Nobody ever does. It was the kind of place that smelled of ozone and terminal silence. A place of life and death stakes that made Seojun's tailored navy suit look like a child's costume. The man standing there, swatting at a pregnant woman for sport, was supposed to be a leader in her husband's organization. Lisa stood in the center of the hallway. She wore the navy blue App & Company jumpsuit with Lisa stitched over her heart. She had looked at herself in the warehouse mirror that morning and made herself a promise. She would not walk into that hospital looking like a widow waiting to be pitted. She would walk in looking like a storm that had finally made landfall. She kept that promise. Even as the boxes hit the floor. Even as the Mafia boss laughed. She didn't flinch. Because she knew what Seojun didn't. The big boss he was waiting for wasn't coming to shake his hand. He was coming to kneel at her feet. The heavy glass doors of the hospital swung open with a hiss, letting in a blast of hot city air. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I couldn't. I clutched the silver cooler box against my chest so tightly my knuckles turned white. Inside that box, resting in a nest of ice and high-tech gel, was a human heart. It was a second chance at life for someone waiting in the ICU, and I was the only thing standing between that person and a permanent darkness. I hurried past the front desk, my heavy work boots thudding against the shiny white floors. Every step felt like a pound against the pavement of my own heart. I was 7 months pregnant, and the weight of the baby made my back ache with every move, but I pushed the pain away. I had been a delivery driver for App & Company for exactly 186 days. To the world, I was just a woman in a navy blue jumpsuit and a baseball cap, trying to earn a paycheck. They didn't see the woman who used to sit at the head of a mahogany boardroom table. They didn't see the widow of Marcus Vance. I reached the elevators and pressed the button for the 4th floor over and over. "Come on," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Just a few more minutes." The doors finally slid open, but the hallway was not empty. My heart dropped. Usually, the ICU was a place of quiet whispers and soft-soled shoes. Today, it looked like a war zone. 6 men in sharp, dark suits stood like a wall across the corridor. They were tall, broad-shouldered, and had the kind of faces that never smiled. They weren't doctors or worried family members. They were guards. In the middle of them stood a man who looked like he stepped out of a nightmare. He was leaning against the wall, picking at his fingernails with a small silver knife. His black hair was slicked back, and dark, swirling tattoos climbed up his neck like vines. This was CO Jun. I had seen his name on the company's internal reports. He was a sub-boss in the underworld, a man who thought money and fear made him a god. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I walked toward them. "I have an urgent delivery for the surgery team. Please let me through." CO Jun didn't look up at first. He just kept playing with his knife. One of his guards stepped forward, blocking my path completely. He looked down at my delivery cap and the logo on my chest with a sneer. "The hallway is closed, girl," the guard said. "Find another way or go home." "There is no other way," I replied, stepping closer even though my legs felt like jelly. "This is a life-saving organ. If I don't get this to the operating room in the next 5 minutes, someone is going to die. Move aside." At the sound of my voice, CO Jun finally raised his head. His eyes were cold and sharp, like pieces of broken glass. He looked me up and down, his gaze stopping on my swollen belly. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He pushed off the wall and walked toward me, his expensive leather shoes clicking rhythmically on the tile. "Look at this," CO Jun said, his voice a low, mocking drawl. "App and company is sending pregnant beggars to do their dirty work now? Is the company so broke they can't hire a real man?" The guards laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the sterile walls. I felt a flash of heat behind my eyes. This was the rot Marcus had warned me about. This was the arrogance that was eating our company from the inside out. CO Jun reached out and tapped the top of the silver cooler with his knife. "What's in a box, little mama? Something expensive? Something I might want." "It's a heart, CO Jun," I said, using his name on purpose. "And if you have one of your own, you'll step back and let me save a life." His smile vanished instantly. His face hardened into a mask of pure hate. He didn't like that a delivery girl knew who he was, and he liked it even less that I wasn't shaking. He stepped into my personal space, the smell of expensive cologne and cigarettes filling my lungs. He looked at the ICU sign behind him, and then back at me. "You think you're brave because you're carrying a kid?" he hissed. "In this hallway, I am the only one who decides who lives and who dies. You aren't going anywhere until I say so." I looked at the clock on the wall. 3 minutes left. I could almost hear Marcus's voice in my head, telling me to stand my ground. I wasn't just a delivery girl. I was the madam of the very empire CO Jun was trying to steal. But for now, I was just a mother with a mission, facing a man who thought he owned the world. CO Jun took a slow step back, but he didn't move out of the way. Instead, he began to circle me like a shark in shallow water. He kept that silver knife out, twirling it between his fingers. I could feel the eyes of his guards on me, heavy and mean. I shifted the weight of the silver cooler in my arms. My back felt like it was on fire, and the baby kicked hard, as if he could feel the danger standing just 2 feet away. "You have a lot of nerve for someone wearing a polyester suit that costs less than my socks," CO Jun said. He reached out with his free hand and flicked the brim of my navy blue cap. "Do you really think this little hat makes you important? Do you think that badge on your chest gives you the right to speak to me?" "I am doing my job," I said, my voice low but firm. "And my job is more important than your ego. People are waiting for this heart. The doctors are ready. Every second you waste is a second that patient doesn't have." CO Jun laughed, and the sound was like dry leaves scraping on a sidewalk. He looked at his guards and pointed his knife at my stomach. "Look at her. She's out here carrying a life in her belly while trying to save a life in a box. It's almost poetic, isn't it? But you see, Lisa, is that your name? This hospital isn't about saving people today. It's about showing who is in charge." Before I could react, he reached out and snatched the delivery clipboard from under my arm. He looked at the paperwork for only a second before he began to rip it into tiny pieces. The white confetti drifted down to the floor, landing on my boots. My breath hitched in my throat. Without that paperwork, the handoff would be a mess. But he wasn't done. "You look tired, Lisa," he mocked, his eyes filling with a dark kind of joy. "You're sweating. Your hands are shaking. Maybe you should just go home and lie down. A woman in your condition shouldn't be out in the world trying to act like a hero. You're just a delivery girl. A servant in a blue jumpsuit." "I am not a servant," I snapped. The fire in my chest was growing. I thought about Marcus and how he had built this company to help people, not to be a playground for bullies with expensive watches. I am the one holding the most valuable thing in this building. Now get out of my way. Seo Jun's face twisted into a snarl. The playful cat-and-mouse game was over. He reached out and gripped my shoulder, his fingers digging into my skin. I tried to pull away, but he was too strong. With his other hand, he swiped at the silver cooler. Let go. I cried out, pulling the box back to protect it. But Seo Jun was faster. He didn't try to take the box, he just wanted to destroy it. He shoved me hard against the cold, icy wall. My shoulder hit the brick with a dull thud, and I gasped as a sharp pain shot down my spine. In the confusion, the silver cooler slipped from my grip. It hit the floor with a loud, metallic bang. The latch popped open, and small packages of medical supplies, gauze, sterile needles, and the cooling packs that kept the temperature steady spilled out across the shiny white tile. I scrambled to my knees, my heart racing with pure terror. If the heart container had cracked, it was over. Seo Jun didn't stop there. He began to kick the scattered supplies away, sending the gauze rolls spinning down the hallway like tiny white wheels. He stepped on a box of sterile gloves, crushing it under his leather shoe. Look at that, he laughed, looking down at me while I was on the floor. The hero is on her knees. Pick them up, Lisa. Pick up your little toys. This is where you belong. At my feet, cleaning up a mess because you didn't know your place. I ignored his insults and reached for the silver cooler. My fingers trembled as I checked the inner seal. It was still intact. The heart was safe, but the clock was ticking down to 0. I looked up at Seo Jun, who was standing over me with his arms crossed, looking like he had just won a great victory. He looked so big and powerful, and I looked so small, kneeling in the middle of the mess he had made. You think this makes you a king? I whispered, looking up at him through the hair that had fallen over my face. Real kings don't have to kick pregnant women to feel tall. Seo Jun's eyes turned murderous. He raised his hand, his face red with rage, as if he were about to strike me. The guards stepped closer, ready to finish what their boss had started. I closed my eyes and braced myself, my hand protectively covering my belly. Then, the heavy silence of the hallway was broken by a sound that made Seo Jun freeze. It was the sound of heavy, expensive shoes walking toward us. The footsteps were slow, rhythmic, and carried the weight of someone who didn't need a knife to be feared. Seo Jun's hand stayed frozen in the air. He turned his head slowly toward the end of the hall, his face turning from red to a pale, sickly white. I followed his gaze and saw a tall man in a gray suit walking out of the shadows of the ICU entrance. It was Paul. And for the first time in 6 months, I felt like the air was finally returning to the room. The hallway became so quiet that I could hear the hum of the lights overhead. Seo Jun's hand, which had been inches away from my face, dropped to his side. His guards stepped back, their tough expressions melting away into looks of pure terror. Paul didn't yell. He didn't have to. The way he walked, his silver hair shining and his expensive gray suit perfectly pressed, told everyone exactly who was in charge. Seo Jun tried to fix his tie, his fingers shaking so much he could barely grab the silk. A fake, nervous smile pulled at his lips. Mr. Paul, he called out, his voice cracking. I am so sorry you had to see this mess. This delivery girl was being very difficult. She was blocking the way and being disrespectful to my men. I was just teaching her a lesson about how we do things here. Paul didn't even look at him. He didn't acknowledge Seo Jun was in the room at all. It was as if the Mafia boss was a piece of dust on the wall. Paul's eyes were fixed entirely on me. He saw the scattered medical supplies, the ripped paperwork, and the way I was huddled on the cold floor with my hand over my stomach. I saw his jaw tighten, and for a second, a flash of real anger crossed his face. Not the loud kind of anger Seo Jun had, but a deep, icy cold kind that was much more dangerous. Paul reached the spot where the supplies were spread out. Seo Jun stepped forward, reaching out a hand as if to help Paul walk past the trash on the floor. Don't mind her, sir. We'll have the janitor clear this up in a second. Please, let me show you to the boardroom. The directors are waiting. Paul finally stopped. He looked at Seo Jun's hand, then up at his face. The look in Paul's eyes made Seo Jun freeze in place. Paul still didn't say a word to him. Instead, he did something that made the guards gasp. Paul, the most powerful CEO in the city, the man who handled billions of dollars and answered to no one, slowly lowered himself. He didn't care about his expensive trousers or the dirt on the floor. He knelt right there in the middle of the mess. Seo Jun's mouth fell open. "Mr. Paul? What are you doing?" "She's just a driver." Paul ignored him. He reached out and gently took the silver cooler from my trembling hands. He checked the seal, his movements careful and respectful. Then he looked me in the eyes. In that look, I saw 6 months of shared secrets and the deep loyalty he felt for my late husband. He reached out a hand to help me up, his touch as light as a feather. "I am so sorry, madam," Paul said. His voice was low and clear, carrying through the hallway like a bell. "I should have been here sooner. Please forgive my delay." The word madam hit the walls and echoed back. Seo Jun looked like he had been struck by lightning. He staggered back, his face turning a ghostly shade of gray. "Madam," he whispered, his eyes darting between my dusty delivery uniform and Paul's kneeling form. "No, that's impossible. She's just Lisa. She's a nobody." Paul finally turned his head toward Seo Jun. He stood up slowly, keeping one hand on my arm to make sure I was steady. He checked the gold watch on his wrist, the one Marcus had given him years ago. "You have 5 seconds to start picking up every single piece of paper you just ripped," Paul said, his voice as sharp as a razor. "And then, you will apologize to this lady for every breath you took in her presence. If you fail to do so, I will make sure the name Seo Jun is erased from this city by sunset." Seo Jun didn't wait for a second warning. He dropped to his knees, his expensive suit dragging through the very mess he had made. His guards scrambled to join him, their hands shaking as they grabbed the rolls of gauze and the crushed boxes. The king of the hallway was gone. In his place was a broken man, realizing too late that the woman he had laughed at was the one who owned the very ground he was kneeling on. I stood tall, pulling my delivery cap a little lower, feeling the weight of the silver box in Paul's hands. The time for hiding was ending. The madam had returned. As I watched Seo Jun scramble on the floor, the cold hospital tiles beneath my feet seemed to melt away. For a second, I wasn't in the ICU hallway anymore. I was back in a quiet, darkened room that smelled of lavender and medicine. The only sound was the steady beep of a heart monitor that was slowing down. Marcus lay against the white pillows, his face thin but his eyes still full of the fire that had built up and company from a single truck into a global empire. He reached out, his hand trembling, and took mine. His skin was cold, but his grip was firm. "Lisa," he whispered, his voice like rust. "The company is strong, but the people, some of them have forgotten why we started. They see the money, not the people we serve. They see power, not the responsibility." I squeezed his hand, my eyes stinging with tears I refused to let fall. "I'll protect it, Marcus. I promise." "Don't just lead them from the top floor," he said, coughing softly. "If you sit in the big office on day 1, they will only show you their best masks. They will bow and scrape, but you won't know who is loyal and who is a snake. Promise me? Promise me you will see their true faces first. See how they treat the person who has nothing. Only then will you know who to trust." That was the night the secret was born. 3 days later, Marcus was gone. While the world's news channels talked about the tragic loss of a legend, I was in a small, dusty warehouse on the edge of town. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call the board. I called Paul. Paul had been Marcus's right-hand man for 20 years. He was the only one who knew the truth. I told him I wanted to start at the very bottom. I wanted to be the girl who delivered the packages, the one who navigated the traffic, the one who stood in the rain waiting for a signature. I wanted to feel the weight of the boxes before I felt the weight of the crown. "It will be hard, madam," Paul had warned me as he handed me the navy blue jumpsuit. "They will be mean. They will be impatient. You are pregnant, and the world is not always kind to a woman alone." "I need to know," I told him, pulling the baseball cap low over my eyes. "I need to see if the company we built still has a heart." For 6 months, I lived that secret. I worked double shifts. I ate my lunch in the back of a delivery van. I listened to the way the managers spoke to the drivers when they thought no one important was listening. I saw the greed in the eyes of men like Seo Jun, who treated the company like a personal piggy bank. I saw the true faces Marcus had warned me about. Every insult I took, every time I was made to wait in the cold, and every time someone looked through me as if I were invisible, I added a name to a list in my mind. I wasn't just delivering packages. I was collecting evidence. I was learning who deserved to stay and who needed to be cut out like a cancer. The beep of a distant monitor snapped me back to the present. I looked down at Seo Jun, who was now holding a handful of crumpled papers, looking up at me with terror. He was seeing my true face now, but it was too late. I had already seen his. Paul held the silver cooler out to me, his face as steady as a rock. The secret was out, and the mission Marcus gave me on his deathbed was finally moving into its next phase. I wasn't just a widow anymore. I was the judge, and the trial had just begun. The sleek black car pulled up to the front of the app and company headquarters. The building was a giant tower of glass and steel that seemed to touch the clouds. Usually, I would have parked my delivery van in the backloading dock, near the trash cans and the noisy fans. But today, Paul held the door open for me at the main entrance. "We have a room ready for you to change, madam," Paul said softly. "Your formal clothes were brought over this morning." I looked down at my navy blue jumpsuit. It was covered in dust from the ICU floor. There was a small grease stain on the sleeve, and my boots were scuffed. I felt the weight of the baby moving inside me, a constant reminder of why I was doing this. I thought about Seo Jun's laughter and the way he had kicked my supplies. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I am staying in this uniform. These people need to see the woman they thought they could push around. If they didn't respect the jumpsuit, they don't deserve the silk." Paul nodded, a small, proud smile touching his lips. He stepped aside and let me lead the way. As I walked through the giant revolving doors, the lobby went silent. The marble floors echoed with the sound of my heavy work boots. The security guards, who usually ignored me or made me sign a guest book in the back, stood up straight. They looked confused. They saw a pregnant delivery girl walking with the CEO as if she owned the place. Behind us, Seo Jun followed at a distance. He looked like a man walking to his own funeral. His slicked back hair was messy, and he kept looking at the floor, trying to make himself invisible. We reached the private elevators. This was the lift Marcus used to take every morning. It required a special gold key and a fingerprint. Paul stepped back, allowing me to be the one to press my thumb against the glass scanner. The machine chirped and turned green. The door slid open with a soft chime. Seo Jun tried to step into the elevator with us, but Paul put a hand on his chest. "You take the stairs, Seo Jun," Paul said coldly. "Or the service elevator. You aren't fit to breathe the same air as the madam today." The doors closed on Seo Jun's terrified face. As the elevator shot upward toward the top floor, I saw my reflection in the polished metal walls. I looked tired, and my face was pale, but my eyes were different. The sadness of the last 6 months had turned into something sharp and strong. I pulled my blue baseball cap off and let my hair down, but I kept the cap gripped in my hand. It was my reminder of the true faces I had seen. When the doors opened on the 50th floor, the entire executive staff was lined up. They had heard whispers that a special guest was coming to take Marcus's seat. They were all wearing suits that cost more than a year of my delivery salary. When they saw me, a pregnant woman in a dirty work uniform, some of them let out a small gasp. A few even started to whisper and snicker. I didn't wait for Paul to introduce me. I walked straight to the center of the room, my boots leaving faint dusty footprints on the expensive white carpet. I stopped at the head of the long conference table. I looked at each director, one by one. I saw the men who had tried to push me out after Marcus died. I saw the people who had gotten rich, while the delivery drivers struggled with broken vans and low pay. "My name is Lisa Vance," I said, my voice echoing through the room. "And for the last 6 months, I have been delivering your packages. I have listened to you talk about efficiency while you ignored the people who actually do the work. I have seen how you treat a woman who is nothing." I tossed my delivery cap onto the center of the table. It landed right in front of the man who had been acting as the temporary chairman. The audit of this company didn't happen in a spreadsheet. I continued. It happened in the hallways and the warehouses. And I've decided that a lot of you don't belong in this room anymore. The purge starts now. At that moment, the door opened and a sweating, shaking Seo Jun stumbled in. He saw me standing at the head of the table, and he nearly fell over. The directors looked at him, then back at me. The power in the room had shifted, and the delivery girl was finally holding the pen. Seo Jun stood in the doorway of the boardroom, gasping for air. He looked like a trapped animal. The fancy directors stared at him in disgust, and then they looked at me with even more confusion. Seo Jun's eyes moved from my dusty boots to the gold nameplate at the head of the table that still read Vance. He started to laugh, but it was a shaky, high-pitched sound that held no joy. "You think this is over?" Seo Jun shouted, his voice cracking as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "You think because you put on a show in a hospital and tricked Paul that you can just take over? You are a girl playing a game you don't understand. I have friends in places you couldn't even dream of. I have people who make problems like you disappear for breakfast." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, his thumb tapping the screen wildly. He was trying to look tough, trying to regain the Mafia King persona he had used to scare me in the hallway. "I'm calling the Dragon Syndicate," he sneered, looking around the room to see if the other directors were impressed. "By the time I finish this call, your delivery vans will be burning, and your warehouses will belong to me. You want to play dirty, Lisa? I was born in the dirt." I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just sat there in my wrinkled jumpsuit, watching him commit professional suicide in front of everyone. Paul stood behind me like a silent statue, his arms crossed over his chest. He didn't look worried. He looked bored. Seo Jun put the phone to his ear, his face turning red with anticipation. "Pick up, you fools," he yelled into the phone. "This is Seo Jun. I need a full-strike team at the headquarters now. I want this woman removed and—" He stopped suddenly. He pulled the phone away from his ear and stared at the screen. He tapped it again, then held it back up. "Hello? Hello? Is there a problem with your service, Seo Jun?" Paul asked, his voice calm and smooth. "My phone, it's dead," Seo Jun stammered. The line was cut. "It's not just the phone," Paul said, stepping forward, so the light caught his silver hair. "While you were busy throwing boxes at a pregnant lady in the ICU, I was busy making a few phone calls of my own. As of 10 minutes ago, every bank account tied to your name has been locked. Your credit cards are pieces of useless plastic. Even that fancy car you parked out front is being towed away as we speak." Seo Jun's face went from red to a sickly, pale green. "You can't do that. That's my money. I earned that. You stole it from this company," I said, my voice cutting through his panic. "You took kickbacks from the shipping routes. You bullied small business owners into paying you protection fees using the app and company name. You thought Marcus wasn't watching, and you thought I was too small to notice. But I've been tracking every cent from the driver's seat of a van for 6 months." Seo Jun let out a roar of frustration and lunged toward the table, but Paul's security team moved faster. 2 large men in black suits grabbed him by the arms before he could get within 5 feet of me. Seo Jun struggled, his slicked-back hair falling over his eyes. "You're nothing," he screamed at me. "Without that money, I still have my men. They are loyal to me, not to a woman in a delivery hat." "Are they?" Paul asked, pulling a tablet from his pocket and sliding it across the table towards Seo Jun. "The Dragon Syndicate doesn't work for free, Seo Jun. And when they found out you couldn't pay your tab this morning, they were very happy to trade your location for a seat at our new security council. Your friends didn't even hesitate. They sold you out for a better deal." Seo Jun stopped fighting. His body went limp in the guard's grip. The reality was finally sinking in. He had tried to use the underworld to threaten the queen of the upper world, not realizing that money was the only language his connections spoke. And I had the only wallet that mattered. "Take him to the security office," I said, looking away from him as if he were just another piece of trash on the floor. "And call the police. I have a very long list of crimes for them to look at." As the guards dragged a sobbing Seo Jun out of the room, The other directors started to straighten their ties and clear their throats. They realized the Mafia boss was just the first name on my list. I picked up my delivery cap from the table and looked at them. The room was quiet, but for the first time, it was the kind of quiet that meant they were finally ready to listen. The directors in the boardroom sat as still as statues. Some of them looked at the door where Seo Jun had just been dragged out, and others looked at me with nervous eyes. They were waiting for me to speak, but I just reached up and unclipped the heavy ID badge from my navy blue jumpsuit. To them, it looked like a normal piece of plastic with a blurry photo and a company logo. To Seo Jun, it had been a target for his jokes. "This badge was a joke to some of you," I said, holding it up so the light from the big windows hit the small glass circle at the top. Seo Jun called it a sign of a servant. He thought it was just a piece of trash that proved I was beneath him. But Marcus always taught me that the best way to see the truth is to record it. I leaned forward and placed the badge on a small black pad on the table. Paul dimmed the lights with a remote, and the giant screen at the front of the room came to life. The video was clear and sharp. It didn't start in the boardroom. It started in the ICU hallway from 3 hours ago. The camera was at chest level, so the view was exactly what I had seen. On the screen, Seo Jun looked like a giant, his face twisted in a mean grin. We all heard his voice echo through the boardroom speakers, loud and cruel. "Look at this," the recorded Seo Jun said, his tattooed neck bulging as he mocked my pregnancy. "App and company is sending pregnant beggars to do their dirty work now." I heard a few directors gasp. They watched as Seo Jun snatched the clipboard and ripped the papers. They watched the silver cooler hit the floor. The camera tilted as I fell to my knees, and the screen showed Seo Jun's polished leather shoes stepping on the sterile medical gloves. The sound of the boxes hitting the floor was loud and painful to hear. "Pick them up, Lisa." The video Seo Jun laughed. "This is where you belong, at my feet." I watched the faces of the men in the room. Some of them looked ashamed. Others looked terrified. I let the video play until the moment Paul walked in, and then I pressed a button to stop it. The screen froze on a close-up of Seo Jun's face right before he realized he was in trouble. He looked ugly, filled with a fake sense of power. "This is the leadership you allowed in your divisions," I said, my voice cold and steady. "While you were sitting in these leather chairs, men like Seo Jun were destroying the reputation Marcus spent 20 years building." He didn't just insult a delivery girl. He insulted every single person who works for this company. He put a patient's life at risk because he wanted to feel like a king for 5 minutes. I turned the lights back up. The brightness made a few people flinch. I looked at the man sitting to my left, a director who had once been Marcus's friend, but had stayed silent when Seo Jun started taking over. "You knew he was using Mafia tactics to move our cargo," I said, pointing at him. "And you," I looked at another woman across the table, "you signed the checks for his security fees without asking a single question." My badge recorded more than just the hallway. It recorded the meetings in the warehouses where money changed hands. It recorded the threats made to drivers who wanted to report the corruption. The ID badge wasn't just a camera, it was a key that unlocked a door they had tried to keep shut. For 6 months, I had been a walking, talking evidence locker. Every hand I shook, every person who looked down on me, and every secret conversation whispered near a delivery van was saved on a tiny chip inside that plastic. "I didn't come here today to ask for your permission to lead," I said, standing up and smoothing out the front of my jumpsuit. "I came here to show you that the woman you ignored has seen everything. The video doesn't lie, and neither do I." I picked up the badge and clipped it back onto my chest. It felt heavier now, not like a burden, but like a shield. The directors didn't say a word. They knew that the pregnant delivery girl wasn't just a widow anymore. She was a witness, and the evidence she held was enough to burn their world to the ground. The police arrived at the headquarters quickly, their blue and red lights flashing against the glass walls of the lobby. Paul led the way as we moved from the top floor back down to the security office. I walked with my head held high, the heavy boots of a delivery worker sounding like the drums of a coming storm. When we entered the room, Seo Jun was sitting in a metal chair, his hands cuffed to the table. His men, the guards who had acted like kings in the hospital hallway, were lined up against the wall, guarded by our own security team. When Seo Jun saw me walk in, still wearing my dusty jumpsuit, he tried to spit on the floor. "You can call the police all you want," he spat, his voice still full of fake bravery. "I have the best lawyers. I'll be out by dinner. And when I'm out, I'm going back to that hospital. I'll make sure the people there know who really runs the neighborhood. You can't stop me from taking what is mine." Paul stepped forward, his face as hard as stone. He pulled a thick leather folder from under his arm and dropped it on the table in front of Seo Jun. The sound was like a book of judgment closing. "You really don't understand, do you?" Paul asked. "You think you're going back to that hospital to scare the staff? You think you still have power there because you pay off a few janitors and nurses?" Seo Jun leaned back, a smug look returning to his face. "I own the streets around that building. The people inside know to look the other way when I walk in. That hospital is my playground." "Actually," Paul said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper, "that hospital is private property, and the person who owns it doesn't like bullies." Paul turned the folder towards Seo Jun and opened it to the first page. It was a deed of ownership, stamped with the highest seals in the city. At the very bottom, in bold black ink, was the name of the owner. It didn't say App and Company. It didn't say Marcus Vance. It said Lisa Vance. "Marcus bought that hospital years ago as a gift for Lisa," Paul explained to the room. The Mafia guards against the wall turned pale. He wanted to make sure that the people in this city always had a place to go where they would be safe. Lisa isn't just a delivery girl who happened to be there today. She is the sole owner of the land, the building, and every piece of equipment you touched with your dirty hands. Seo Jun's eyes went wide as he stared at the paper. The smug look didn't just fade. It vanished, replaced by a look of total shock. "That means," I said, stepping closer until I was looking Seo Jun right in the eyes, "that when you threw those boxes in the hallway, you were trespassing on my property. When you threatened the medical staff, you were threatening my employees. And when you blocked that surgery, you were interfering with my hospital's mission." I looked over at his guards. They were looking at the floor now, unable to meet my gaze. They had spent the morning bullying a woman they thought was a nobody, only to realize they had been attacking the woman who signed the paychecks for the entire district. "The police aren't just here for the company fraud," Seo Jun, Paul added. "They are here because the owner of the hospital is pressing charges for assault and reckless endangerment. There won't be any high-priced lawyers to get you out of this. You didn't just break the law, you broke the one person you should have feared the most." One of Seo Jun's own men, the one who had blocked my path first, suddenly stepped forward. He looked at me and bowed his head low. "We didn't know, madam," he whispered, his voice trembling. "He told us you were just a target. We were just following orders." "Following orders doesn't give you the right to be cruel," I replied. "You watched a pregnant woman struggle on the floor, and you laughed. You had a choice to be a human being, and you chose to be a shadow." Seo Jun let out a low, broken moan. He looked down at his cuffed hands, the falling crown of his Mafia pride lying in pieces around him. He had lost his money, his company rank, and now his reputation on the streets. He was no longer the king of the ICU. He was just a man in a rumpled suit, sitting in a cold room, waiting to be taken away. As the officers led him out in front of his silent, shamed men, I felt the baby kick again. It was a soft, steady movement, as if to tell me that the world was becoming a little safer for him to enter. Paul reached out and touched my shoulder. "It's done, Lisa," he said. "No," I said, looking at the door. "The trash has been taken out. Now we have to finish the delivery." The morning sun streamed through the high windows of the boardroom, but the room felt different than it had a few days ago. The air was no longer heavy with fear or the smell of expensive, cold cologne. I sat at the head of the table, still wearing my navy blue delivery jumpsuit. Paul had offered to have a custom silk suit made for me, but I had refused. This uniform was a part of me now. It was a reminder of the miles I had walked and the weight I had carried when no one was looking. I looked around the table at the remaining directors. They sat with their notebooks open, watching me with a new kind of respect. They weren't just afraid of my power. They were listening to my words. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old, scuffed delivery cap. I placed it in the center of the table, right where the expensive flower vases usually sat. For too long, this company has looked at its success through a telescope, I said, my voice calm but strong. You looked at the big numbers and the global maps, but you forgot to look at the people on the ground. You forgot the people who drive the vans in the snow, the people who sort the boxes in the heat, and the people who deliver life-saving hearts to hospitals while being treated like shadows. I slid a thick document across the table. It wasn't a report on profits or stock prices. It was the legacy plan, a complete restructuring of app and company. From today on, our highest-paid executives will spend 1 week every year doing a delivery route, I announced. A few directors shifted in their seats, but no one dared to argue. You cannot lead people if you do not know what their shoes feel like. We are raising the pay for every driver and warehouse worker by 30%. We are replacing every old, broken van with new, safe vehicles. And most importantly, we are creating a direct line to my office. If a manager ever speaks to an employee the way CEO June spoke to me, they will be gone before the sun sets. Paul nodded slowly, his eyes shining with pride. He knew Marcus would have loved this. Marcus had built the bones of this company, but I was giving it a soul. A leader is not defined by how many people bow to them. I continued, resting my hand on my stomach. The baby was quiet now, as if he were listening. A leader is defined by how they treat the person who can do absolutely nothing for them. We are here to serve the delivery drivers, the nurses, and the families waiting in the ICU. If we aren't doing that, then we don't deserve to have our name on this building. After the meeting, I walked down to the loading docks. I didn't go to the private elevator. I took the stairs. When I reached the back of the building, a group of drivers was standing around, taking their morning break. They saw me coming and started to straighten their hats, looking unsure. They had heard the stories about the madam in the jumpsuit, but they didn't know if I was still one of them. I walked up to an older man named Sam, who had been driving for the company for 20 years. His face was lined with wrinkles from years of squinting at road signs. "How's the heater in your van, Sam?" I asked. He blinked, surprised that I knew his name. It's been broken for a month, madam. I've just been wearing extra socks." I turned to the manager standing nearby, who turned bright red. "Fix it today," I said firmly. "And Sam, take tomorrow off with full pay. You've earned a rest." A cheer went up from the drivers, a loud, genuine sound that echoed through the warehouse. It was the best sound I had heard in 6 months. It was the sound of a debt being paid, not a debt of money, but a debt of respect. As I walked back toward the front of the building, Paul joined me. We stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the giant app and company sign. "What now, Lisa?" he asked. "Now," I said, looking down at my belly and then out at the busy city streets. "We keep moving. There are still a lot of deliveries to make, and I want to make sure every single one of them is handled with care." I had started this journey to find the true faces of the people Marcus had left behind. I had found greed and cruelty, but I had also found strength and hidden goodness. I wasn't just a widow or a delivery girl anymore. I was a mother, a leader, and a woman who knew that the most powerful thing you can be in this world is humble. I turned and walked back into my building, ready to lead, not from a throne, but from the front lines. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt small or worthless or forgotten, I want you to know something. You're not alone, and you're stronger than you think. If you enjoyed this journey with me, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. People who need to hear them. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had a moment where you'd stood up for yourself? Where you finally said enough? I read every single comment, and I love hearing your stories. And if you want more stories about survival, strength, and second chances, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. I share new stories every week.